how you like it, yeah.
What's up, everybody, and welcome back to the We Don't Know TV podcast. My name is Leaf. I'm your host. This is a podcast where we watch the first episode of a show and then we talk about it. Today, we are talking about Sweet Home, which is a Korean show on Netflix. I usually don't just go on a streaming service and watch something random, but on the promotional picture, I saw a guy with a black wing. And there's nothing that makes a character cooler to me than a black angel wing. So I saw that and I was like, I gotta try it out. And the little description was like, hey, people are turning into monsters instead of a zombie apocalypse. It's a monster apocalypse. So I was like, all right, I'm gonna give this one a little shot, see what we got going on. So let me start with the general premise. This is according to IMDb. It says Hyun, a loner high school student who lost his entire family in a terrible accident, is forced to leave his home and has to face a new reality where monsters are trying to wipe out all of humanity. Now he must fight against all odds to try and race against the clock to save what is left of the human race before it's too late. A little mouthy for me. I would have made that a little bit shorter, but it feels pretty solid. I feel like some of the things are a little bit of a spoiler before we even get into the episode. But if it is your first time here, I go through the entire plot, so you don't have to. So in case you haven't watched the episode, you can just come along for the ride. So we start in September of 2020. There are a bunch of soldiers on a bridge. They're completely filling up this bridge, so there's at least 50 of them. Off the bat, it feels very underworld. If you've ever seen those movies with the vampires and the werewolves. If not, you can just Google some pictures. You'll know what I'm talking about. We see a bunch of monsters. They are in the snow. Everything is snowing. The soldiers can't see anything. This guy walks out in a torn shirt and he's covered in blood. He keeps on walking. Eventually, we get a closer look at his face. He has full black eyes that kind of go to normal, but they're still kind of black. The soldiers are like, yo, you need to back up. You look human, but we don't know what you are. But he just keeps walking. And then this is where the entire squadron, again, there's 50 people on this bridge, all have assault rifles. They just unload. But the weird thing is none of the other monsters seem to be getting shot, and this guy Hyun, well, at least you assume it's Hyun, gets shot 3 times. So I was like, it's a little extra if you're gonna show everybody and their mama shooting, but then only show the character getting hit just a handful of times. You could have just had one guy be like, hey man, back up, we're gonna shoot some warning shots, you know what I mean? That's a small thing. As he's getting shot, the other monsters are kind of freaking out, but it's not really clear what in the world is going on. And so we got a little voiceover, and essentially saying, hey, this is a story about the people that survived and how they kind of try to make it through whatever is going on. And then we go into the intro. Sick intro. Definitely enjoyed all the visuals of it. It was really cool. We hop back to August of 2020. This is where we meet Hyun, the main character. As he is walking to this building, he almost gets killed by a blade from a weed whacker. Security guard's like, oh, sorry, my guy. They got me doing security. They got me doing landscaping, a little bit of everything, I'm a slave. And Hyun's just kind of you know what I mean? You almost killed me, my guy. The security guard is talking to him, and Hyun is very soft-spoken, so he says something really low. He's like, what? And the security guard's like, what did you say? And then he's like, hey, I live here, or I'm living here now. Just basically a very awkward conversation, and the security guard asks him if he lives alone, and Hyun's like, yes. So it's all right, cool. He lives alone, a teenager by himself. Before I get into the episode real quick, or more of the episode, this is a Korean show. I think I said that in the beginning, but it's in case I didn't. This is a Korean show. So other than Hyun, most of the characters, I'm going to just describe them as what they appear to be rather than trying to say their names. I looked up the characters' names and I was like, I'm just going to butcher this. So if I say the security guard, I'm just going to keep saying the security guard. Hyun, he is sitting in his room alone and suddenly decides, you know what? I'm going to jump off the roof. And it's okay, we're barely into this episode. We are barreling through. We cut back to the security guard. He fell asleep on the job. His boss is like, listen, you can't be sleeping on the job, man. In fact, I guess he has a little bed in his office. He's like, you got to take that out of there. And the guy's like, why? And he's like, well, we've had complaints about you sleeping on the job. The bed's got to go. one of the neighbors comes over and she's like, oh, that guy's so mean to you. Hey, I got this fish. I don't want it. It's not really, the type of fish I eat, but you can have it. And he's like, oh, thank you so much. And then he opens the package and the fish is rotten. And then he immediately gets a nosebleed. And it's like, okay, what's this lady's deal? Like, off the bat, it's like, all right, it's a little weird. And like, okay, let's see where this is going. So Hyun, is on the roof, and he is about to jump, wherein he suddenly sees a girl doing ballet. The ballerina is doing her, she's practicing when she accidentally steps in something, and she's like, hey man, did you put this here? And he's like, no. And then she's like, oh, it must have been someone else. She takes off her shoes, she like cleans it up. She asks Hyun if he wants a cigarette. He's like, no. She's like, okay, are you like a loner or something? He doesn't answer. And she's like, listen, you're clearly going to jump. If you're going to do that, do that somewhere else. If you do it here, it's going to cause more problems for everyone here. So like, go somewhere else, dude. We go back to the security guard. He's looking weirdly at the door, at Hyun's door to be specifically. And he's like, oh, hey, Hyun, I need you to fill out this registration form. I don't know if I said that earlier, but I kind of need you to do it. And Hyun's like, oh, I'll do it later. Like, he's acting all weird. As he goes into his apartment and goes to close the door, the security guard holds the door open. And then Hyun's like, yo, like, what are you doing, my guy? And the guy's like, oh, hey, sorry, I felt bad for almost killing you. And he, like, gives him a drink. The security guard's still, like, holding the door. And then eventually he like lets go so Hyun can close it. And Hyun's like, he has a face like, what the fuck was that? And he looks out his peephole just to be sure. And the security guard is just like oddly standing out there creepily. And the only reason he even moves away is because one of the other neighbors walks by. You can hear her conversation. She's trying to be an actress. She just did a gig. She's really hungry. And then the last thing we hear is she's like, oh, I got a nosebleed, just like the security guard. So I was like, something's going on here. But we hear a noise. It turns out it is the upstairs neighbor. It is a girl playing guitar. She is playing a song for someone on the phone. And she's like, what do you think? And they're like, that song sucks. And she's like, whatever, I got to go to work. So the rocker girl runs into one of the neighbors, and she's like, oh, you're the one playing music. And she's like, yeah, sorry, Alex, like, I make music and I also listen to music. Sorry if I'm loud, I'll try to keep it down. And the neighbor that she's talking to has a stroller with the baby. And she's like, oh, how old's your baby? And she's like, oh, my baby's 1 year old. You want to look at her? The rocker girl looks down, and there's no baby in the stroller. And she's like, oh, that's like, he's such a pretty baby. And they're both waiting for the elevator. So as the elevator opens, the mom gets inside and she's like, like, come on in, there's plenty of space. And the rocker girl's like, no, I totally forgot something in my apartment. I'm going to go grab it and then come back for the next elevator. Okay, bye. And so the mom leaves. And this is where another resident of the building, Jung, comes by. And he's like, listen, I know she seems weird, but she lost her baby in an accident, and clearly it's hit her hard. It feels like life challenges us sometimes. So, kind of cut her a little bit of slack. They both get into the elevator. They have a really awkward conversation. Young is either just trying to make conversations or trying to get to know her a little more. But he's like, hey, I'm a Korean language teacher. I have this Bible because I go to church. Don't worry, I'm not trying to get you to come to church. I'm not a missionary or whatever. I'm just, this is why I have this Bible. And it's like, yeah, cool, dude. And it's like really awkward. It's like, oh God. As they leave the elevator, Young bumps into another guy who has a scar on his face. Then we kind of cut from there. So we go back to the ballerina. She's in her room. She has a bruise on her ankle. Her brother, well, I assume it's her brother. It's not really clear what their relationship is, but I'm just going to say it's her brother because they look like they're the same age or around the same age. So her brother tells her, like, hey, you got to pay for these dancing fees. She's like, I did it already. And he's like, okay, well, how did you do that? Like, where'd you get the money? She's like, oh, well, I met a rich guy. And he's like, can you just tell me where you actually got the money from? And she's like, don't worry about it. All up in my business. And I didn't notice this the first time I watched it because I watched this twice just to be safe. I was like, oh, she's lying about paying her dancing fees because she can't afford to pay her dancing fees, which is why she's dancing on the roof. And I was like, oh, that makes sense why she's being all weird. But the first time I watched it, I was like, I didn't pick up on that. We then cut to the guy with the scar on his face, who I will now be referring to as the hitman, because he has a guy duct taped on the floor. He's like leaning his feet on him and like using that guy as a table. The guy who's tied up is like, I didn't do anything. You know, like, kind of, why are you doing this? And the hitman shows him his phone. And the guy's like, okay, we don't get to see what's on the phone, but he shows him the phone. And the guy who's tied up is like, I don't know what you're showing me. The hitman gets pissed off and he takes his cigarette and then puts it in the dude's mouth and then like holds his mouth shut. And this part was really weird because I was like, either he's got the wrong guy or the guy on the floor is really good at like keeping a secret, but the guy on the floor doesn't come off as a good actor. The way that the scene is portrayed is that this hitman has the completely wrong guy but went through it anyways, kind of like, and he was like pissed off about it, like, why are you acting like you're not the guy that I came here to kill? So it was very confusing in this scene. I was like, what the hell is supposed to be going on? Because it feels like the characters don't, or at least the hitman doesn't know what's going on. So I don't know if that's ever gonna come back. But yeah, that felt really weird. We cut back to Hyun. He's throwing up his ramen. Great to see. He gets a congratulations text. He has been chosen to be a tester on this new video game, I assume. There's going to be a fan festival, and it is going to be on August 25th. Now, Hyun immediately goes into his his calendar, and he's like, I am going to kill myself on the 25th. And it's like, all right, we are really committed. Not sure why he's feeling this way other than the fact that he's alone. So I'm like, can I get a little more explanation on what's going on? Because he kind of just seems depressed. I just feel like it's a little bit of an extreme way to show it without really explaining why he's already at this point, especially because it's the first episode. But it's like, all right, this guy is clearly going through something. We cut back to the ballerina. She is locked out of the roof. We don't know who did it. She sees the hitman. He is smoking a cigarette. She goes over to him. She's just very bold. She's like, yo, are you unemployed? Because, like, you look like a gangster, but I don't really know if you pay rent here. And it's like, girl, what do you do? Like, you don't know this man. And he's like, why are you asking me all these questions? Like, aren't you supposed to be in school? And she's like, no, I got kicked out of school because I set the school on fire. And they both kind of look at each other, and then they don't say anything. And maybe it's the anime, you know what I mean? Maybe it's the anime, but I'm like, you got this old man, he's clearly older, he's like in his 30s, got this teenage girl. I'm like, please just leave it alone. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, if you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. But I'm like, can we just, she's a teenage girl. That is all I'm going to say. Did not feel comfortable. Well, I mean, granted, they didn't shoot each other any, like, looks. I'm just saying, let's keep it off the table, okay? We cut back to Hyun, and he said he's been there for a week. And I was like, okay, I guess he's just been living life. Like, nothing really has been happening. He's only been eating ramen. His body is hating him for it, but he doesn't care because, again, he's already scheduled his self-delete. He's playing a video game. We see that he has cuts on his wrists, so he clearly has some issues with depression and self-harm. As he's playing, he hears his neighbor. Turns out she didn't get the audition. She's still super hungry. She starts crying. I guess he's in a group chat or something like that, where he gets a bunch of messages from people that know him. They're like, why did you move? Oh, and one saying that, like, oh, he moved because his parents have died. And he's like, oh, sorry that happened. And his chat's blowing up. His neighbor's crying. It's all just very overwhelming. We cut to Hyun waking up. And this is where the episode really picks up. So Hyun wakes up to a text, and it's like, hey, we have your package. There was no security guard. We left it outside your front door. He goes to open the door, and he sees his package of ramen. And the little ramen packets, it looks like someone's eating, like taking a bite of them, like a little crumb trail. And he's like, what the fuck? So he follows the trail around the corner to where his neighbor's apartment is, and he sees more crumbs. He sees a puddle of blood, and then you see a cat head roll out, and then this dark hand grabs it and like pulls it away, and he's like, oh hell no. And he accidentally steps on a packet of ramen behind him, makes a noise, immediately runs into his apartment, slams the door, hides under the covers, just in the same way that I would do everything. And this is where he, the not the alarm, what's the thing? His doorbell is going off, and it's a lady from next door. She's like, oh, like, please, I'm scared. I can't find my cat. Like, please help me. And by the way, if you didn't watch the episode, in these apartments, they have like a little TV, so you can see who's at your front door, but it's like connected to a phone. So it's like a phone and a screen. She's like, I'm scared. Please let me in. He's like, I'll call the police. And she's like, no, please, just let me in. I'm scared. And he's like, all right, show me your arms. And she goes, what? And he goes, yeah, let me see your arms. And then she freaks out. And then she starts trying to break into his apartment. She's like slamming on the door. Blood starts pouring out of her nose. And then this is where we hear the upstairs neighbor, the rocker girl, playing music. And the monster lady, as I'll start calling her now, is like, oh, I guess I'll go get a meal upstairs. And she does this weird thing where I think it's supposed to be creepy, but it turned out to be a little funny, where she kind of like scuttles like to the side, like to this, how do I say this? Like, instead of just like turning and walking away, she just kind of like side walks like a crab, like out of the frame. I was like, that was a really weird choice. Hyun's like, he has a moment. He doesn't say anything, but he has a moment where he's clearly like, fuck, I don't want to do this, but like, I can't let my neighbor die for like no reason. So he takes his broom, breaks the bottom, turns it into like a spear, I guess, runs out into the hallway. Monster lady's gone. The hitman casually just walks down the steps like it's a regular day. He's like, what the hell is all this blood on the floor? And this is a weird cut I noticed. So if you watch the episode, you can go back and see what I'm talking about. If not, when Hyun originally runs out of his apartment, ready to potentially fight off the monster lady, he has no blood on him. Then it cuts to the hitman walking down the stairs. Then it cuts back to Hyun, and Hyun is now covered in blood. And then the hitman's like, yo, why you got all this blood on you? And I was like, wait, hold up. I had to like rewind. I was like, so I feel like there must have been a moment where either he accidentally slipped or they had him fall in the blood or something like that. Or maybe it was more of a bloody scene and then they just had to cut it down or something. But yeah, he goes from having absolutely no blood on him to having all the blood on him. And then as the hitman comes up to him, Hyun just randomly passes out. The rocker girl, well, we're now up to her apartment. She hears a knock on her door. She apologizes. She's like, oh, I'm sorry for playing music so loud. I'll try to keep it down. The monster lady is full on monster now. She's on her screen and she's like, I'm hungry. And she like tries to break down the door and the girl's like freaking out. She doesn't know what to do. She grabs a bat. She's like ready to, defend herself. And the monster lady's suddenly gone. And then she sees the scar part of the hitman's face up in the screen. The rocker girl freaks out. We cut. Now, we go back to calmness. We are with the brother again. Turns out he studies sports medicine. He tells about his sister. He's like, hey, eat ramen for dinner. I'm going to go and then I'm going to come back. If you're not home later, I'm going to report you to missing. And she's like, yo, just report me as dead if that happens. Classic sibling banter. The brother leaves. He sees that the elevator is under maintenance, so he has to take the steps. We go back to the rocker, and she's explaining to the hitman, like, everything that just happened. We pan over and see that there's a hole in the window, and she's like, yo, did that monster lady hop out the window? Like, what the hell? She was like, oh, yeah, she was, like, punching the door. And the hitman punches the door, and he's like, nah, she wasn't just punching the door. She must have been ramming the door. It's like, sir, how did you even figure that out? Also, like, I don't... Like, does that really help with anything? I don't know. I think it's just to add tension to the scene and saying she was acting irrational. But it just felt a little weird, very anime. But yeah, we go back to... Oh, and the other thing I just realized now is that I was like, did he just leave Hyun passed out on the floor? Because that's the last time we saw him. And now he's upstairs talking to the... rocker girl. So I was like, what the hell happened there? Are we missing scenes? I don't know what's going on. But it turns out that the building is on lockdown. Security guard is nowhere to be found. All the residents are kind of in this main entrance area. There's an older guy. They're like, yo, we got to go into the security office. The old man's like, no. I don't know if he's like part of the build, like he owns part of the building or whatever, but he's like, if we break down the door, then we have to pay for like a new one. And the brother's like, fuck this. And he grabs a fire extinguisher and just breaks the chain on the door so they can get it open. One of the people that were originally in this main area was a firefighter named Yi. Yi calls 911. It says every operator is dealing with a disaster report. So something is going down in the city. The older guy finds the switches or the breakers, and he's like, oh, I can get the door open. So he presses the button. The people that are standing at the main entrance are like, yo, there's a guy outside. What the hell is wrong with him? And then we see this monster, and he's like 6 feet tall. He has this giant chrome dome head. It is huge. And then he has a jaw that can like lower down to like the chest area, and with this tongue that comes out. So they see this thing and they're like, oh my god, put the gate back down. And the tongue like breaks through the door. It like grabs a guy and lifts him up, and then it like sucks, I don't know if it's blood or marrow or the moisture or whatever, but it like sucks him dry to where he looks like he is now a mummy in like an instant. And of course everyone's screaming, everyone's running away. Brother comes back with the fire extinguisher. He starts spraying the monster. He's like, yo, back up. And then they put on Imagine Dragons. And it's like, guys, I get what you're going for. It's not the worst song. I'm not an Imagine Dragons hater. But like, it just doesn't work for the it suddenly turned into like a CW moment, and it's like, guys, this is not what you needed for this. You turned it into this. But the brother is pushing back this monster with the fire extinguisher, and of course, right as the gate is closing, because the guy has turned the gate back on, right before he can get the monster past the gate, of course, runs out of fuel. What we're gonna do? And then Yi comes over, she goes, yeet, and then like bum rushes the monster, hits him like a linebacker through the door. I hate to be nitpicky. She lands way farther than she should have. Like if you think about going into a store, right? Think about like Target, right? Think about how far the front door of Target is to like the first parking spot, right? It's not that far, but a pretty good distance. Now imagine tackling someone at the front door and then suddenly getting up at that first parking spot. You're gonna tell me that's not so far? That's how far she goes from the front door, just tackling that monster. She's suddenly like way farther than she needs to be. And I was like, how did she get that far? Did she teleport? Like, what's going on? A weird thing I noticed. She gets up, the tongue of the monster hits her in the leg. She has to like, try to make her way back. The brother is holding the door open, or the gate up, so it doesn't close. It's clearly like one of those moments where he's like, I'm pretending this is heavier than it actually is. Hurry up. They both get through the gate. The monster's tongue, shoots out, almost gets Yi, but then, has to be drawn back because the gate is now closed. This is where we see the monster. And now, when the monster first came, there was a mixture of practical and CG effects. The CG wasn't that bad, but in this moment, the monster's like almost like a marionette, but like not well done. It's like moving really like weird, but not in a like creepy weird way, more in like an odd way. I was like, oh, why did you do that? It's like, it's weird looking. I don't know how to describe it. You have to look it up if you haven't watched the episode, but it doesn't look good in my opinion. And then Yi pulls glass out of her leg, and it was very confusing because I thought she got hit with the monster's tongue. So I thought it was going to be like, oh, is this like a zombie situation where she's going to have to deal with like, am I going to turn into a monster? But no, I guess the monster had picked up a piece of glass and then stabbed her in the leg with a piece of glass. Because I was like, so what is that supposed to convey? That the monster's just so smart? Or like, was that just to draw attention? It was very confusing. I was like, wait, where did that glass come from? And it like pulled me out of the scene. But everyone gathers around. They start to hear a bunch of sounds outside. This is where we cut out to see all the monsters. And the monsters are, so, maybe the first one looks scary. But then I realized it's like a monster nurse, and she has like needles in her chest. So I was like, what? That's like oddly sexual question mark. I was like, okay. And then all the monsters, like some of them are like, most of them are like CG, some of them are practical. Some of the movement again is like weird, almost like claymation that they tried to animate, or like they tried to animate it and look like it was claymation, so it like it's like kind of choppy looking. But in a word, if I had to describe it, it just felt goosebumps. Like it was one of those things where it's like, sure, from their perspective, I'm sure it's absolutely terrifying, but from my end on the TV, I'm like, oh, these are just kind of weird, but they're not like scary, if that makes sense. So it didn't work for me. And then they go protein and they like all scream together. I was like, you're really pulling me out of this scene, man. The episode ends with Hyun looking out into a burning city. I really like the shot. I think it's really cool. There's a bunch of there's flocks of birds just being like, we gotta get out of here. And then his nose starts to bleed. And at this point, they really overdid it. Like his nose is bleeding, and they're like showing the blood dripping onto supposed to be like a napkin or whatever. But they keep playing the sound of his nose supposed to be bleeding, and I feel it the sound is like he's filling up like gallons of blood, and it's like, guys, you're overdoing it. You could have definitely toned this down. I mean, he's losing a lot of blood out of his nose, but it's not like the sound opposed to what they're showing. It sounds like he's just again filling up a 2-gallon jug with blood sound wise, but he's just having a pretty bad nosebleed visually. So I was like, there's a lot of disparaging going on here. But yeah, that's kind of where the episode ends. Now, if it's the first time here, I have a 3-point rating system. It is one and done, give it a chance, or I am in. For this one, I would give it a chance. I feel like even for all of the weird inconsistencies and the weird, or just the way that the monsters aren't really scary to me, and some of the way they move and stuff didn't work for me, all that negative stuff said, I feel like this first episode had a lot of tension, and I have enough questions about are we gonna get more of these characters, and getting to know what are they because hold on, I'm overthinking. So the hitman, right? Was that the right guy? It's not really important now, but I kind of want to know, the sister, what's going on with her? Because she kind of acts tough. She smokes cigarettes, and she's like, let's set the school on fire. But it's are you actually like that? And now they're putting this, potential apocalypse situation. It's okay, we have to cover if you were who you were based on this first episode, and who are you going to be now, because your life is on the line, because people are turning into monsters. And then, of course, we have the spoiler of the beginning of the episode and the visuals being that Hyun is going to be one of these monsters, and his arm turns into a black wing. So it's okay, what is that? How is he going to deal with that? And, the fact that he was depressed this whole episode. So, him turning into a monster, what does that really do for his mental state? Does that give him sort of some sort of new meaning on life or something? I don't know. There's enough questions as a short answer that I'm interested enough in the individual characters who met so far to see how much more that we get of them in terms of their characters. The monster part, which is the main part of the show, is actually the part I am kind of least interested in, simply because none of the monsters seem to grab me enough to be oh, I have to watch for the monsters. But the first one, by the first one I mean the one with the tongue, was interesting. So I'm oh, it'd be cool if each monster has its own little quirk that we have to go through. And then also with Hyun turning into a monster, it is interesting to be okay, what is this show? Is this going to be a monster of the week? Is this a drama? Are we heading to in my mind, I think of MTV's Teen Wolf type territory, where it's we're going to have a single narrative, right? But we're going to have to go through these monsters. There's a term for it. There's episodic and serialized, I think, is what I'm thinking about. It's like, okay, what is this show? Is it one or the other? Is it a little bit of both? What are we talking about? All that rambling being said, I would give this one, give it a chance. I'd try another episode and see where this is all going. This is where I'm going to leave this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. I appreciate your time. You can follow me on Twitter at Little Leafers, or X if you want to call it that. I've made it a what's it called? I've made a commitment to myself to be more consistent if I actually want to do this in a serious manner. So next Tuesday and every Tuesday after that, I'm going to start dropping these episodes. I promise myself, and I promise you guys here now. So I will see you on Tuesday. All right. Have a good day. Peace.